Welcome to True Diversity Film Series, Standing in Solidarity. My name is Donna Walker-Kuhn. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm Senior Advisor, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion here at New Jersey Performing Arts Center. This evening, our discussion is a very important one. The power of our vote is immeasurable. Our panel will discuss the importance of voter registration, creating a voting plan, how to vote, and why to vote. I would like to thank the NJPAC staff and for all of their great support in preparing for this evening. I also hope you were able to watch the film, Suppressed and Sabotaged, The Fight to Vote. This film link was provided in your registration. This film also informs the discussion this evening. This social justice series is part of our Standing in Solidarity initiative, and we are in our 4th season of this social justice series. The purpose of the series is to bring our community together and to encourage everyone to take part in the movement to ensure civil rights for all. On our website, you can find archived prior social justice panel discussions, as well as resources that will help you take action. We're also happy to have as our advisors Newark and NAACP, the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice, Newark Arts, the Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation Center at Rutgers University, Newark, the Department of Africana Studies at Essex County College, the Asian American Arts Alliance, and ACLU New Jersey. Now, NJPAC would like to offer a land acknowledgement. The language we're using was created with consultation and guidance from Chief Dwayne Perry of the Ramapo Lenape Munsee tribe and Oleana Whispering Dove of the Eastern Salagi Algonquin descendants. We're grateful to them for their generosity, wisdom, and labor to craft these words. We, the Lenape, original benefactors of land once ripened and cultivated with attentiveness to the Creator and her ascendancy, express everlasting gratitude to our Creator for the traditional ancestral jurisdictions of the Munsee, Esopus, Canarsie, Capsee, Werpoes, Siwanoy, and Weekasqueak, jointly known today as the Ramapo and Natikote Lenni Lenape. We are the Lenape Hoking today and will be for the remaining days of tomorrow, keepers of the past. Let this moment of recognition be a monument of action. Let it be the beginning of hope for this, our Turtle Island, and for the Ramapo Lenape, the Munsee people, of whose land we now trod. Here on this land, in this place of the Munsee, we acknowledge our debt to those who have come before us, to those who have been denigrated and suffered for the sake of cultural and land appropriation. Let this, our land acknowledgement, be the beginning of our return to unity. Let us be guardians of the water, the air, the earth, the four-legged, the flyers, the swimmers, the crawlers, the mammal people, and the green. Let us now stand lifting our humanity and rapturing with Earth's consciousness as guardians of harmony and kindness. I would like to thank our corporate sponsor, ACLU-NJ, for their ongoing support of our social justice initiatives. It is now my pleasure to introduce our moderator for this evening's discussion, Sarah Fajardo, Policy Director at the American Civil Liberties Union of New Jersey. Sarah, as Policy Director, develops and leads policy advocacy campaigns to advance the rights of New Jerseyans. She was previously in New York, where she developed and launched a campaign called Ending the Poverty to Prison Pipeline, and helped publish a report with the same name. Sarah has held numerous positions leading advocacy at a variety of arenas, and she serves on the board of CAB, organizing Asian communities. Welcome, Sarah, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Donna, and thank you for that powerful land acknowledgement and setting the stage for our conversation tonight. Sarah Fajardo, Policy Director at the ACLU of New Jersey, and I'm honored to join. The ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, is a national organization with affiliate offices in every state. We fight to protect the rights guaranteed in the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, and are a nonpartisan and nonprofit organization. Here in New Jersey, our mission is to preserve, advance, and extend the individual rights and liberties guaranteed to every New Jerseyan by the state and federal constitutions, in courts, in the legislature, and in our communities. We work across issue area, including the topic today, protecting and expanding voting rights, ensuring and expanding voter access to polls. And we also work on criminal legal system reform, police reform, reproductive freedom, immigrants' rights, and more. Tonight, our discussion will focus on the cornerstone of our democracy and the fundamental right upon which all our civil liberties rest, voting rights. A democracy is strengthened and upheld when its members are informed and able to participate actively in democratic processes. Voting is one of the most direct ways to influence government, and yet for centuries, people have been excluded from voting by virtue of their race and gender. As we see in the documentary Suppressed and Sabotaged, The Fight to Vote, there are continuing attacks on access to polling places and voting, with a particular focus on barring access to vote for communities of color. This documentary makes it clear that the war on democracy is far from over. As one of the most diverse states in the country, New Jersey must be a national leader in strengthening voting rights and dismantling barriers to the ballot. Tonight's panel will focus on voting rights and processes in New Jersey, how far we've come, and what more can be done, and concrete actions that we can all take. Without further ado, I'm really honored to introduce and facilitate this panel of illustrious New Jersey leaders who uphold and protect the rights of New Jerseyans every single day. We're joined by the following experts, and we'll invite you to turn your camera on as I name you. Madam Lieutenant Governor Tahesha Way, a longtime public servant, Lieutenant Governor Way has devoted her entire career to improving the lives of her fellow New Jerseyans. Over the past 2 decades, she has served at numerous levels of local and state government. As Lieutenant Governor, Ms. Way brings her extensive experience to bear on addressing the greatest challenges facing New Jerseyans. In addition to her role as Lieutenant Governor, Ms. Way also serves as New Jersey's 34th Secretary of State, a position she has held since the beginning of the Murphy administration. Welcome, Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you, Sarah. Good to be with you.
Thank you. Also joining us tonight is Ryan Haygood. Mr. Haygood serves as the president and CEO of the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice, where he leads a team of advocates who harness community engagement, research, writing, public education, policy, and litigation to build reparative systems that create wealth, justice, and power for Black, Brown, and other people of color. Under Ryan's leadership, the Institute's advocacy has become a model for states as places to build community power from the ground up. And certainly not least, but she is the last in my list tonight, Ms. Deborah Smith-Gregory. Ms. Smith-Gregory has served as the president of the Newark chapter of the NAACP for over 10 years, leading the racial and social justice work of a critical chapter of the NAACP organization for New Jersey, and has served as a personal inspiration. Thank you. Deborah has special expertise in voting rights, getting out the vote tactics, and she also has served as a teacher in the Newark public school system for 3 decades. Welcome, and thank you so much, everyone, for joining. We would love to welcome you to just give a quick introduction of yourself and what you're hoping to cover tonight. And we'll start with Lieutenant Governor.
Okay, again, thank you, Sarah. And of course, thanks to Donna, NJPAC, and all the sponsors for organizing this important event on our democracy. And of course, it's a privilege to serve alongside such distinguished panelists like the phenomenal Deborah Smith-Gregory and the ever-powerful CEO, Ryan Haygood, good friend. I just want it to be clear in terms of our democracy. Here in New Jersey, we are strong, but we are going to keep working to ensure elections are free, fair, and secure, and that everyone who is eligible to vote can cast their ballot without any interference. We are fortunate that we're not seeing formal government-led suppression of the right to vote here. At the same time, there still are challenges facing all of us. One that undermines voters' confidence. And I would just like to quickly speak about the exposure to mis and disinformation about our elections. We're likely to see a bit of this upcoming election cycle in November, But of course, we're really concerned about the false information related to the upcoming 2024 presidential and congressional elections. So whatever the intent is, whether it is being shared to mislead or just accidentally wrong or incorrect, we want to ensure that not only are our voters voting, but they are educated. So the hope is through our conversation, we can speak about our election processes and ensure that everyone, again, can vote freely, fairly, and securely. And the final thought that I have in mind, and I may say this oftentimes, but in terms of voter education and voter needs information, we always ask our New Jersey voters to just visit the site, vote.nj.gov. Looking forward to the conversation, and thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. Welcome, and thank you for those powerful words. Mr. Haygood, will you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you'd like to cover tonight?
Sure, Sarah, thanks for the gracious introduction. It's always wonderful to share this space with my dear friend and now Lieutenant Governor, along with the Secretary of State designation, Tahesha, and of course, Madam President Deborah Smith Gregory. And I thank NJPAC for convening, I think, what is one of the more timely conversations around democracy. I really appreciate the title Democracy User's Guide, because that title presupposes that a democracy is made strong. A democracy is made legitimate when people participate. So it presupposes that we use the democracy we have by participating in it. So part of what I want to talk about tonight is what we have done together collectively on this Zoom to help build in New Jersey one of the more inclusive democracies in our country, and some of the work that we have the opportunity to do going forward. And then I will frame it, Sarah asked me to lift this up, I'll frame it in the context of the battle for voting rights that took place in the city of Selma, Alabama. There's a poster over my shoulder here that transformed American democracy, and I think gives us a model for how we can approach our work building democracy here in New Jersey.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to the conversation. Madam President Smith Gregory, will you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit more about what you're hoping to cover. Oh, could you unmute yourself? Sorry. Thank you.
Yeah. Serving as the president of NAACP Newark and being nonpartisan does not mean that we don't take an active role in pushing forth democracy. And that looks like voter registration, voter education, which empowers voters and our citizens. And we can't stop there though. We have to have voter mobilization. We have to get people out to vote. We have to make people understand, yes, there's an election coming up in 2024, but there's one right around the corner that we've seen in recent events, that the power of the state and state rights and state power can make a direct impact on our quality of life, as well as our ability and opportunity to vote. So my call is a call to action, to get out and vote. That's what I plan to talk about. And I also plan to encourage people and challenge people to come up with a plan, because New Jersey has more than one way to vote. And we need to be conscious and intentional about using one of the ways and making sure that we mobilize our friends, our circle, our village to do the same.
Thank you. I'm already feeling activated tonight. So let's dive right in. Lieutenant Governor, could you talk a little bit about your role as Secretary of State, what that role is responsible for, and what role you play in our voting process?
Well, thank you, Sarah. It's truly been an honor since 2018, serving as New Jersey's 34th Secretary of State. As everyone knows, I was appointed then by our Governor Phil Murphy. And, you know, this truly is a passion of mine and my team to ensure the fair access, as Deborah noted, as Ryan noted, but on a more simpler level, in terms of the administration of our voting process. I just want our public to understand what we, through the Division of Elections, do. I think the main foundation of all that we do is just the underpinning that this is a team sport, right? So we work closely with our county folk who are truly on the front lines of our democracy, making sure that all of the machines are there, our ballots go out, etc. And, you know, oftentimes the public may think that the election work starts a day before elections, a week before elections, but I must truly credit the local election workers because they are on the clock 24/7, 365 days of the year. Now, my Division of Elections supports our statewide voter registration system. We inform our local election officials about any legislative changes which may impact election administration. We make certain that they develop continuity of operation plans in case of any emergency scenarios. We provide statewide guidance for key election processes. And we also liaise with our federal partners, such as an organization within Homeland Security, which is called CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Oftentimes, we hear about whether or not our election infrastructure is shored up from cybersecurity and just the basic security levels. Well, that's where CISA and some other federal partners and state law enforcement partners come into play. And I must admit that my team and I, we have had the privilege to develop best practices through our association. We have about 40 state secretaries of state who actually oversee elections. So especially in 2020, we all know the unprecedented event that we underwent with the pandemic. And that is when New Jersey decided to pivot in terms of our elections rollout. And we decided to mail out 6 million plus ballots to voters for that election. So we had to really rely upon national colleagues from other states where voting by mail is regular or even predominant means of voting. And with those types of relationships that we've ultimately developed, it's helped us to make informed decisions, especially in 2020. We were able to have multiple layers of communications to ensure that our voters were aware of the change in the processes. We were able to understand how and where to place hundreds of secure ballot drop boxes. I believe there's about 400 now, which is a good thing throughout our state. And this was an ultimate, in my eyes and many others, means for a successful election in 2020.
It's an incredible body of work, and that was truly unprecedented and such a huge pivot. And you mentioned, a pivot towards a new way of voting by mail that hadn't been utilized quite as broadly in New Jersey. Could you walk us through the options for New Jerseyans on how we can vote and the different ways that New Jerseyans can cast ballot?
Sure. The beautiful thing that I oftentimes say, it is a good thing to be a voter in New Jersey because of the access eligible voters have. Now, 3 ways to vote. We have on election day in person, and we also have the in-person early voting period. And just as I mentioned, the vote by mail. Now, if you are a vote by mailer, there are different ways in which you can return that ballot. Do know that if you return it by mail, you have to have it postmarked. We're a postmarked state on the day of election, if you decide to do that by mail. Similarly, if you want to return your ballot at one of your local secure ballot drop boxes, you can do that. And you want to, again, make sure that by 8 p.m., same thing with the postmarking of through regular mail, you want to make sure by 8 p.m. on election day, you are returning your ballot at one of the secure local ballot drop boxes, or you can actually go down to your board of elections in your county and drop off your ballot.
Amazing. Thank you. And are there dates or resources that you want to particularly lift up for our
I surely want to lift them up and lift them up high. And I hope those who are viewing are truly making certain that they pencil or pin these in or put them in your smartphones, because these are very important key dates for our upcoming election. Now, just this weekend, September 23rd, is going to be the commencement of the mailing of mail-in ballots for this upcoming election. Then on October 17th, we talk about voter registration. Well, the voter registration deadline for this upcoming election, October 17th all. From October 28th through November 5th, we have the early in-person voting period. I know that ever since early in-person voting started, I've opted to vote in person early. Is seamless. You go to one of your locations within your county. It's a good thing. October 31st is the deadline to apply for a mail-in ballot by mail for this election. November 6th, capped off at 3 p.m. is the deadline for in-person mail-in ballot applications. And then, of course, November 7th is General Election Day. But I also want to note that the deadline for receipt of timely mailed, and as I mentioned moments ago, postmarked mail-in ballots, that's when the county boards of elections will cease receiving these postmarked ballots and counting them, is November the 13th. So I can't tell voters how to vote, or I can't tell you if you decide to vote by mail, how to return it. But this is what I can only say, that there are the about 400 secure mail-in ballots. I know I'm repeating myself, but this is significant and important. And what is also important, if you live in County X, make sure you return your mail-in ballot to a county secure box. So do not return it to County Y, okay? And then, of course, you can walk or drive to your nearest county board of election to return that ballot to. All of this information, Sarah, sorry, I'm including a lot, but of course, this is good stuff. You can go to our website. That's vote.nj.gov. I'll repeat it one more time because it has all of the information. It links all of our voters to their county officials. It even has animated features of how to register to vote, about the vote by mail process and more. And that's vote.nj.gov.
Amazing. This is absolutely invaluable information, and it's great to hear it from the expert who's managing the entire process. So thank you so much for walking us through that. Just as we start to pivot our conversation, I wanted to ask if there are any pro-democracy policies that the Murphy administration has been working on or has worked on that you'd like to lift up, or any kind of closing thoughts for us as we keep the conversation flowing.
Well, there are actually two that are already in place that I truly, truly want to lift up. And thank you for asking this important question. And my partner, I could say, Brian, he really was lifting up the policy of those who are serving on parole and probation can now register to vote and also vote, okay, without any penalties or fines. I want to mention this one because I don't think there's enough awareness out there about this. So if we all can come together, again, this is a team sport. We don't need anyone riding a bench. We need folk to be active participants in education. And of course, I'm a trusted source as in addition to other county folk out there, election folk. But nonetheless, we want to lift that one out there for full participation. And similarly, on a different note, we want to lift up, our governor, legislators too. They rolled out the in-person early voting. So similar to mail-in voting, folk had to get used to that style of voting is out there. We really want our eligible voters to become accustomed and understand, hey, you can go right around to your nearest library or wherever the in-person early voting site is. Pass it by, you don't have to wait for November the 7th. Again, these are important times, the October 28th through November 5th period, because one never knows, you might have to go out of town. Something just, occurred in one's life and you say to yourself, oh goodness, I wasn't able to vote. Well, now we have the added layer of access for all of our eligible voters. So we want to lift that up. And on a separate note, I also want to mention, and I always humbly ask folk out there, go to pollworker.nj.gov and become a poll worker. No other great way to actually witness, right, democracy at its height on election day, November the 7th, and during our in-person early voting period. So thank you, Sarah, for asking.
Thank you so much. We know that you have to step away a little early today, but we are so grateful for your time and thank you for your expertise and your service to New Jersey. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
All right, take care. Thank you. So we're going to pivot a little bit, and I was hoping, Ryan, that you could zoom out for us and help us get some context and some historical background about some of the attacks that we're seeing on voting rights across the country. And we'll start there.
Yeah, Sarah, love the question, and you're doing a wonderful job moderating. It's great to share this space with you. So I love the question because to pick up on the Lieutenant Governor's point, I think democracy requires participation, but part of the reason it requires participation is because democracy in this country has always been contested, particularly for people of color, Black and brown and other people of color, and for women. And so in that sense, democracy has always been a fight to gain access to it. And then once having access to it, to maintain access to it over time. And in that way, I think if there's a theme about democracy, it's really one that's characterized by periods of expansion, almost always followed by efforts to scale back democracy. And so we started the conversation by referencing Selma. There is a picture of the bridge behind me. And I think a lot about how Selma's battle for democracy has informed an international fight for democracy, and more to our state for our fight for democracy here in New Jersey. So really, really quickly, there was, as folks know, a day called Bloody Sunday. It was a Sunday 58 years ago when then a young John Lewis, more recently a late Congressman John Lewis, Amelia Boynton, and 600 other peaceful protesters led a march over the Edmund Pettus Bridge that connects the city of Selma to the city of Montgomery, a nonviolent march to make the promise of democracy real. And it was that march that led to the passage of the Voting Rights Act, which was a transformative moment in our democracy in 1965. And Sarah, as you know, Deborah Smith Gregory, as you know, as folks watching us know, the Voting Rights Act within just one generation led to the election of more than 10,000 Black elected officials, including the first Black president, right? So a Black person ascends to the highest office in the land within just one generation of the passage of the Voting Rights Act. But consistent with our theme, that democracy's expansion is always followed by efforts to scale it back. right after President Obama won the first time, there became this narrative that became very popular. It talked about how the fact of his election ushered us into a post-racial America. Some may remember that, a post-racial democracy. And what we saw was this really intense assault on voting rights that took root everywhere across the country as part of a broader effort to scale back democracy. And so you have a Black person elected to the highest office in the land 2 times. You can't have that happen without then having what happened in 2020. I think that's just sort of a part of our democracy in 2016 and 2020, an effort to scale it back. You have this happening alongside some really sharply changing demographics, that the country is becoming more people of color. In fact, the 2020 census in New Jersey shows that people of color are now a majority of the state, which we think is really exciting because of what it portends for our opportunity to bring new people of color into the Democratic fold, for them to participate in new ways. But it's also true that there are real fierce efforts to resist including new voices, new people of color into the democratic process. And so you have these dynamics happening across the country. To your point, Sarah, there is at this very moment a real intense assault on voting rights that's been both historic in its scope and its intensity. And all of that happening in the country, along with us, our inspiration around what happened in Selma, Alabama, led us, ACLU from New Jersey, Newark, NAACP, a bunch of partners, including the Secretary of State, to think about how might we in the state of New Jersey build the most inclusive democracy in the country, right? So acknowledging the voter suppression happening in other states and the challenges we have here, to be sure, how might we build an example of what an inclusive democracy looks like? And in my time here at the Institute for Social Justice, I've been here now 8 years. We worked with you all, a number of partners, to think about how we might do that. Part of that required us to take an annual pilgrimage to Selma with our board chair, Paulette Brown, with other trustees, with Henel Patel, our law and policy director, and a good part of our team, to draw that inspiration. And then here in New Jersey, to the Secretary of State and Lieutenant Governor's point, one of the first things we looked at was, why is it that in New Jersey, people with criminal convictions couldn't vote if they were in prison, on probation, or parole? And really quickly, Sarah, we learned that in the year 1844, New Jersey did 2 things. In that year, New Jersey both restricted voting to white men only, and it restricted the right to vote for people with criminal convictions. So we launched a campaign called 1844 No More, Let Us Vote. It was designed to connect people with criminal convictions to the right to vote. And through some really fierce advocacy, our collective advocacy, in 2020, at the very beginning of the pandemic, the governor signed a bill that restored the right to vote to 83,000 people, a bill that we championed together on probation and parole. But because that bill became effective at the very beginning of the pandemic, it was hard for people to register. So we collectively championed online voter registration, through which more than 400,000 people registered to vote for the 2020 election. This was part of our effort to build in our state one of the most inclusive democracies in America. We carried alongside that a successful effort to end what's called prison-based gerrymandering, which counts people in prison in their prison communities as opposed to their home communities. So we reversed that trend to make sure that representation and resources go to the places where people who are incarcerated will return. And then more recently, on the day that Georgia passed a real shameful package of voter suppression tactics, including prohibiting people in line from receiving water from people who bring it to them, we championed early voting that the Lieutenant Governor spoke about. And we had a press conference with the governor, Lieutenant Governor, some of our partners, and Stacey Abrams on that day. And then more recently, as I mentioned, the 2020 election happened. The 2020 census happened, which leads to what's called redistricting, right? Redrawing boundaries, districts in New Jersey. And my colleague, Henel Patel, wanted me to make sure to encourage folks to make sure that you know which district you live in, because the representative you may have had before this round of redistricting may be different than the one you have now. So please be mindful of the way that redistricting changes boundaries, it changes lines. Make sure you know what your current district is. I want to lift up a couple of things really quickly, Sarah. So that's what we've done in this state, right? But we're thinking about how do we continue to build on that work, the work of building the most inclusive democracy. And I'll drop in the chat just a few things we're working on with partners that include channeling Selma, Alabama. How do we create in our state our own Voting Rights Act? There is a federal Voting Rights Act that I mentioned. A core part of it was struck down now 10 years ago by the Supreme Court, and Congress has failed to act in the last 10 years. This was the very piece of the Voting Rights Act that made it possible to transform American democracy, and yet Congress has not yet acted. And so we, with partners on the Zoom and beyond it, more than 60 groups organize themselves to get a bill introduced that will create our own Voting Rights Act, a New Jersey Voting Rights Act. And I'll drop some information in the chat about how you can join that campaign, centering the power of your voice to urge your legislators to move that bill. The next piece I want to lift up is same-day voter registration. We've been championing this with our partners for a couple of years. This would do away with the need to have a voter registration requirement. The states with the highest turnout have same-day voter registration, which is that on election day, you can both register and vote. And that's something we must have in New Jersey. We will have when we organize ourselves powerfully enough to move our legislators to do so. Last thing I'll lift up, we could talk more about this, is thinking about, so getting very, very local, thinking about how do we engage the next generation of young voters. We were all heartbroken about how we saw George Floyd murdered before our very eyes when Darnella Frazier, the then 17-year-old, captured it on her telephone. But we were also inspired by the way that we saw more than 14 million, mostly young people, take to the streets in some of the largest protests in American history to protest his killing, the conditions under which too many of our folks live. Now comes thinking about how do we engage young voters earlier in the democratic process. And we're working with partners to think about how we can bring lowered voting age to 16-year-olds in our cities for school board elections, acknowledging what's happening nationally around school boards and attacks on teaching truth about race and racism, structural racism, and the broader challenges that young people face nationally. How do we, in our state, think about bringing voting to 16-year-olds in our cities across New Jersey? And Sarah, I'll pause there.
Incredible. It's so exciting to hear both about the wins that New Jersey has gotten thanks to the hard work of the folks on this call and so many others, but also inspiring to hear about what's next, what's coming, and a good reminder for everybody that the fight for access to broad and strong voting rights is ongoing and that we're all responsible for participating. So thank you, Ryan, for laying that out. Deborah, I'd love to draw you into this conversation further and ask you to talk a little bit about and bridge what Ryan just shared about some of the work to engage new voters, younger voters. Could you talk a little bit about your work and the NAACP's work with civic education and tell us what that is?
Yes, well, I just want to say that the work that the New Jersey Social Justice Institute does is extremely invaluable, because they're pushing the envelope in a way that cannot be denied. And what I want to read a quote that one of the co-founders of the NAACP, W.E.B. Du Bois, said. And what he said is, the power of the ballot we need in sheer defense. Else, what shall save us from a second slavery? And so I heard Ryan talk about scaling back, but and it's not even a but. I would say it was a vicious, and has been a vicious, backlash. This country has been modeled to, as he said, to have only a certain kind of voter. There was a time when it wasn't just Blacks who could not vote, women could not vote as well. And so this society is having to grapple with changes that are intimidating and fearful to those who have been in the power seat for centuries. And so now the fear displays itself in the repressive, oppressive, extreme tactics that George Floyd manifested, that Black Lives Matter protested about. So with the NAACP, the one thing that has been consistent over the last 114 years is understanding the power of the ballot, the power of voting and getting out to vote. People, we talk about and we say things like, we know that people died for our right to vote, but we have to, it can't just be a little saying, a little quip, we know that our ancestors died. We have to manifest that in how we act today. When Ryan talks about Selma 58 years ago, and I made the comparison with the film Sabotaged and Suppressed. We're talking about in 2018, what happened in Atlanta. So what happened in Selma 58 years ago, what happened in Atlanta in 2018, and then bringing it to what's going on in New Jersey. We cannot be complacent about voting. We cannot talk about why vote, or it doesn't matter, or other people are voting, so I know that I don't have to. The whole notion of going back to a second slavery is not, it's not meant to make people fearful. It's meant to make people think, because we must think about where we are now and where we want this country to go, being a multiracial, multicultural state, a multiracial, multicultural country. Where do we want to go? And we have to start home. We cannot take New Jersey for granted. Oftentimes it's said, New Jersey is so progressive, and the things that Ryan has laid out shows that we weren't as progressive as people might think, because what the Institute did was to make sure that people who have been incarcerated can vote. If we were so progressive, they would not have had to press like that. Or if, the whole notion of same-day voter registration, or even the fact that young people should be able to vote for something that directly has an impact on them. I would say that the one thing that I know we need is voter education, because if we have voter education, then we can know just how important voting is, just how important it is to cast our ballot and not make any assumptions. And I would say, even those of us who have children, we kind of take it for granted. We go vote. Take your child to vote. Take your grandchild, take your niece, take your nephew, take your mentee, take someone with you so that they can understand more organically about the importance of voting, because it's something that they're witnessing and they're experiencing. And so the NAACP, we have embarked upon an aggressive voter education, not just through civic education, where we say, here's a one-pager, this is the role of the state Senate or the assembly or the county, but having the opportunity to hear candidates present their platform, and then pressing on our voters, our residents, to get out and vote. The lieutenant governor said there's 3 ways to vote. So we don't have any excuse or any reason not to. We cannot, I can't express it enough about complacency, because complacency has been a window opening, if you will, for the type of government that we say we don't want to have, for fascist government. When you look at how they first got started, they didn't just pop out the sky to be an authority. They did not. It came over time because the people became more and more complacent about what was happening. We can't say, well, we've gone through COVID, we're in a haze, we're still trying to recover. And it really, that's not high on my priority list. Well, what happened in January, on January 6th, the infamous day of January 6th, shows that it has to be high on our priority list. Because one thing, no matter how much we talk about being that it does, our vote doesn't matter or this or that, Black people in particular are so patriotic and so brand loyalist, right? And so when we get something, we hold on to it. We hold on to it. It's something that we need to teach our young people, not so much about the brand loyalty, but about the importance of making their voices heard by voting. So that's why we stand in complete solidarity with Ryan and his team, pushing forth lowering the voting age to 16. What we would want to see attached to it is like a half a year, at least minimally, of civic education, so that the young people could really have a full understanding that, okay, so you're voting in the school board election, but your what's next is deciding who's going to be your governor, who's going to be your president, who's going to be your New Jersey Senate, who's going to be, and just all the way down, who's going to be your mayor. That's what we have to make sure that they are connecting the dots from the local all the way to the national.
Thank you so much, Deborah. Ryan, I'm going to ask if you want to respond to Deborah in a minute, but one thing that I wanted to just follow up on is I've heard you talk about the why, like what motivates folks to vote, and some of the impacts of voting that you've mentioned to me in the past of what it means to cast a ballot for someone who's going to make a decision that will directly impact your life. Could you talk a little bit more about the issues that voters are really voting for when they're casting ballots for people who are representing them?
You said Ryan, but I think he's still on. So
that was directed to you, Deborah. I was telling Ryan I'll get back to him in just 1 second.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. Say it again. Say it again, please.
Yeah, I'm just
why.
Yeah, talk to me about the why. Yeah, the motivating why.
The motivating why is where we work, minimum wage, Social Security, no Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, mortgage, rent control, no rent control, affordable housing, smooth roads, not smooth roads, pothole roads, the snow being removed, the snow not being removed. And it just goes on. It has the why is the direct impact on the quality of our lives and how we live day to day. You know, so we stand in support of the various unions that are now striking, right? They're striking because they want their people to have a more comfortable wage. They want their workers to have benefits that are comparable to what they need to maintain their families and themselves. And so the why is all of that. It's not just about getting your paycheck on a Friday and partying over the weekend and then going to work on Monday. It's not, it's everything. It could be something as simple as going to the park with your family and being able to enjoy clean air, clean drinking water. All of those are the whys. It's so many whys. I could just go on with the whys. It is for our children and their schools that they attend, and the curriculum that they receive or that they don't receive, the critical thinking skills that are imparted unto them, or the test taking skills that they're only given. It's all of that. The why is it's the crux. It's the crux of voting. The what is, early voting, vote by mail, the how, more so the how. But that why is not going to go away as long as we have breath. And then when we die, the why is the will, or the not the will. The why is the inheritance tax. It goes on. The benefits of a widow, or of children, or of caregivers. Right? It's all of that. So that is the second slavery, is having someone decide all of these things for you, and you do nothing but respond. You don't think, you respond, you act accordingly. That's the second slavery.
Thank you. You've named so many reasons why, and you've really given us a call to action, a call to grasp our agency. And I know that both of you all have really concrete action steps that voters can take and New Jerseyans can take. I'd love to hear a little bit more about action steps that you want to share with the audience tonight, and next steps for folks. Ryan, to get involved in the campaigns that you're running to help move us towards even more accessible voting rights. And Deborah, for voters, how can voters support their loved ones in voting? You've shared some really interesting ideas with us in the past. So whoever would like to go next, maybe Ryan, do you want to jump in here?
I just want to say about Ryan. Ryan is a come-togetherer. I made up a word, a come-togetherer. When he did the 1844 No More, when they did that, the Institute, he does not move in silos. Like, okay, this is the New Jersey's Institute for Social Justice Initiative. That's not how he rolls. He doesn't move that way. How he moves is, hey, Deborah, we got this initiative coming on, and we want to tell you about it and see if you want to get involved. Hey, Larry, we have this initiative going on and we want to know if you want to get involved. That's what he does. So he pulls in, as he says partners, he pulls in community leaders, and he does not say, okay, well, the Institute is over here, and POP is over there, the NAACP is over here, the League of Women Voters are over there, and ACLU is over there. He says, come on, y'all, come on. This is an initiative that I think that we can all buy into, and together, collectively, we can make this happen.
Thank you. Thank you for that framing and that reframing, Deborah. I appreciate that.
Yeah, that's high praise from Madam President, because she doesn't suffer fools, But I love that point, because I think, that's what democracy requires. Democracy requires all of us to lift our voices to hold people in positions of power accountable.
Absolutely.
Madam President mentioned this. I mean, I think that New Jersey, sort of, we have the veneer of a progressive state, right? And in many ways, that's part of who we are. But there's another piece of New Jersey's identity that's very much in the opposite direction. And even the most progressive sounding elected officials will be keepers of the status quo if we don't together organize ourselves as folks did in Selma, Alabama, to expand democracy and hold people in positions of power accountable to us, to the people. And so our advocacy here at the Institute is only as strong as the people that we work with to hold those people in positions of power accountable. And I think that's what's been really beautiful about what we've done in New Jersey the last 5 or 7 years in each of those areas. And I think that's why we will see, to your point, Sarah, things like same-day voter registration, things like a New Jersey Voting Rights Act, things like lowering the voting age to 16-year-olds in local elections, things like ending New Jersey's line. That will happen because we will organize ourselves in a way that lifts our voice to push elected officials to do right by the people. And it's been interesting because if you think about the 2020 elections in New Jersey, we had historically high turnout. It also happened that these elections happened in the throes of an international public health crisis. You would think that the numbers would fall off. Now, that was a very high stakes election, to be sure, but part of why the turnout was historically high is because we worked to make sure that New Jersey did everything it could to bring democracy to its people, right? Restoring the right to vote to 83,000 people on probation and parole, making voter registration available online, to the Lieutenant Governor's point, providing myriad ways for people to cast their ballots, either by mail, in person, drop boxes, right? That was the thing New Jersey did. And I think it's interesting when you think about that historic high versus the turnout we see, for example, in our school board elections. You know, we're having this conversation here in Newark, New Jersey. In the last school board election, turnout of registered voters was less than 3% for the school board, right? One of the most important elections impacting our young people, and fewer than 3% of registered voters turned out. So there's two strategies, right? One strategy is we need to figure out how we engage more registered voters, and we should do that. But I think another complementary strategy is thinking about how do we bring new young voters, to Deborah Smith Gregory's point, who have the most direct say in school board, the outcome of school board elections. How about if we bring them into the Democratic fold early? And that's why I'm excited about this effort, because here's the thing: New Jersey's Constitution gives cities, city councils, the authority to lower the voting age in local elections. City councils don't need the state legislature to act. They have the authority to act in that way on their own. And so what we've been thinking about is, so how do we partner with people across New Jersey to begin to push city councils with the advocacy of young people, right? We're thinking 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds. Imagine this. They're going into city councils across New Jersey, testifying about why those city councils ought to act to lower the voting age to 16 so that they can participate in those school board elections. And here's the thing, Deborah Smith Gregory, you could very much imagine young people running their own candidates, right? Not relying on a line to dictate to them who appears as the folks they can choose from. They decide on the strength of their own collective power, their own collective voices, their own collective advocacy, who shows up in those school board elections and who ultimately gets elected. And so there's a question about how do you engage young voters. I think part of the way you engage young voters is you help them to realize that democracy is real, that democracy is not fixed, that the outcomes are not fixed the way that the line very often does in our state. And part of our strategy around focusing on school board elections is we begin to bring new young voters into the Democratic fold in ways that we can't predict the outcome of. And I think that's the beauty of this effort. And I think that's why we'll start to see it take root across the state of New Jersey.
It's allowing them to participate most of us learn by doing, right? Not so much what someone said, someone told us, oh, voting is important, but by doing something and saying, and seeing the outcome. So holding our elected officials accountable is something that is extremely critical. Young people will want to hold elected officials accountable for decisions that directly impact them. And the why could be school lunch, right? You know, we can all, I don't care how old you are, everyone can relate to, you either had a great school lunch or you didn't, right? And if I can vote for someone who says, hey, we want to have healthy food in our schools, and we're going to work to do that, that shows the participation and the outcome of someone, of them participating. And I think that it's a wonderful idea. I think that the young people, a lot of times we have it like it's either young people or older people, but we have to start blending. We have to become multi-generational in our approach to the quality of life that we want to have. And we want the voters to be able to have a say-so. And then if we elect someone that does not do it the way that we think it should be done, that looks at a position as one of self-aggrandizement as opposed to public service, then we say, okay, you got to go.
Mhm.
And young people will do that very quickly. We say, oh, give them another chance. And young people are like, nope, gotta go. So I look forward to that.
Yeah. And if I could just say really quickly, Sarah, you know, the Madam President has been very kind to me on this Zoom, but folks should know that off camera, she's fond of saying to me and my team, look, the policy work you all do is like, it's important, but it's also meaningless if people don't know about the policy implications. If you, for example, restore the right to vote with your partners to 83,000 people on probation and parole, but 83,000 people don't know they now have this newfound right. And so this really gets to the civic engagement aspect of the work that Madam President is lifting up. And here's why I think there's real promise. So if you think about it, voting is a learned behavior. Each of us learned how to do it in some way. I went to the polls with my mom. I watched her do it, right? It's very much a learned behavior. And if parents are active in taking their young people to the polls with them, they help to build a culture of participation, right? Yeah. But if in a city like Newark, the school board participation is 3%, it means at a minimum, very few people are participating or registered. That means they're not taking young people with them. That means we're actually creating in our city a culture of political non-participation. And so the piece that President Smith Gregory lifts up is the importance of getting into the schools. We've talked to the superintendent here about working together to do that. He's doing a lot of that work now to begin to talk about why voting matters, right? Not in the abstract, but why it matters concretely. And instead of saying, as we often do, and you can register to vote in a couple of years, bringing that right to them at this time. And I think there's a real promise then that we no longer rely simply on the existing registered voters to engage democracy. We actually then begin to empower young people to bring their parents with them to the polls, right? It actually has the reverse impact of engaging democracy younger to encourage more mature generations to follow their lead.
And we know that democracy is a year-round, right, process. So the voting cycle happens, people are elected, and then as you both have mentioned, we have to hold electeds accountable. And so building that muscle for young folks and parents of young folks or people that love young folks to then continue to engage with their electeds, to hold them accountable and to say, hey, what you're doing is not something that I support, when they see something like that, is absolutely critical and can literally change the structure of our society. So super excited to hear about this work. Deborah, did you want to say anything more about civic engagement, civic participation, any encouragement or strategies that you'd encourage our New Jersey community members to take as we're in the lead up to November and this next cycle?
Well, one of the things that I do want to lift up is the film that accompanies this panel discussion, Suppressed and Sabotaged. It is designed to make you think. It is about the election that happened in Atlanta and everything that volunteers did, that workers did to make sure that people got out to vote. It talks about the pain of not being able to vote because of voter suppression tactics. And one of the things that I said to you all earlier is that even though that happened in Atlanta, something that Dr. King said about a threat anywhere is a threat to all of us. And so we have to be mindful to look at what has happened in other places and use some of the tactics. One of the tactics that we find that's not being used as much, but we have picked it up, the NAACP has picked it up, is talking to people, going door to door. It doesn't diminish the impact of social media, but social media oftentimes make it where someone can be anonymous. And they can say whatever they can say whatever they think that you want to hear. Whereas when you look someone in the eye and you talk to them and you explain to them their importance and their role in voting, and go over the different ways that they can vote, it has more meaning for them that, oh, okay, somebody stopped and took the time to have this conversation with me. And so our intention is to go out again, door to door. And it's truly amazing to hear what residents think. One of the things that we did this past summer, we spent every Thursday at the Sounds of the City at NJPAC, every Thursday. And we talked to people. Yes, we were down there to register people to vote. But what we found is that people are in the question and they want to talk. They want to have dialogue with someone about how they're feeling, about what's happening, and tips and pointers. And so that is what we did, and that's what we'll continue to do, even as it gets colder and people start going in. We all will have palm cards that say, "Hey, here's some ways to vote." And these are the 3 ways that the Lieutenant Governor spoke about: the early voting, the in-person, the vote by mail, and the card will also give them, as you said, the why. Why should we vote? And then encourage them, and then remind them. Repetition is how people learn. Reminding, follow up, reminding, hey, picking up the phone, or whatever it takes to get people to understand their importance and the importance of them casting their ballot.
Thank you. Thank you for making those connections for us and reminding us the why, but also how we build that voting muscle as New Jerseyans. I really appreciate that. Ryan, do you want to talk to us about what comes next for your campaigns and what we can do to support?
Yeah, so I mean, this is a critical year. This, I think it was mentioned, is an election year. It's actually, you wouldn't know it, right? You wouldn't know it because it's quietly an election year. And candidly, there's a strategy around that, right? There's a strategy around having elections quietly, in part because some elected officials rely on elections to happen quietly so they can rely on the folks who voted for them to get them in those seats. And part of what I think is required of people like us on this Zoom is to hold our elected officials accountable. So each of them is up in the New Jersey legislature, in the Assembly and the Senate. Every seat is up this year. And I think part of what is required of us is to go to our elected officials and ask them if they support the things we've talked about tonight. So I've dropped some things in the chat. Do you support same-day voter registration? And would you support the bill that's been introduced? Do you support creating a New Jersey Voting Rights Act? Get very, very local. Go to your city councils and say, do you support lowering the voting age to 16 for students in school board elections? You know, these, I think, are important ways for us to wield our power as constituents, to organize it collectively, to do the work that candidly won't get done unless we push our elected officials to do it. And this is a real prime opportunity to do it. Other piece, there's a question about poll workers. I think that's an important way to engage. To engage as a poll worker. There's even a stipend that's offered to poll workers. There's another one is to be a poll monitor. You know, every year we work with a bunch of partners to do election protection work. The number is 866 Our Vote, and we dispatch volunteers to polling places to make sure that the voters are having a positive experience. We do really need more voters out focusing on the issues, right? Sometimes I think in our state, we get caught up in machine politics and party politics, but I think to the extent we can focus on the issues, right, we think we do a better job of empowering people, whoever is in power. And part of our charge is to keep them honest, or holding them accountable to advancing the policies we're talking about and not around the status quo.
Amazing. Thank you. I just put that number in the chat so folks have that as well. With the panelists' permission, we do have a few questions, and I'm really interested to circle back to the lowering the voting age effort that we've been talking about. So there's a question about points or arguments against lowering the voting age. I'd love to hear a little bit about your response, Ryan and Deborah, and how you address the potential of 16-year-old voters being just another representation of their parents' choices. What do you think about that thought?
Deborah, do you want to take that?
That's where the civic engagement, what I said, the civic education part comes in. The curriculum can be for a half a year. Civics used to be a course. It can be reintroduced in a different way. It doesn't have to be a year long, but it is important for our young people to understand the civic engagement part, the civic education part, the critical thinking part, so that they're not manipulated as the person questioned, just doing what their parents have been doing. My sons don't. We have very candid, lively discussions about candidates and platforms that they move. This is what needs to happen in homes. Okay, we can't just rely on the schools to do it, but we have to have conversations also and be willing to listen to something that we don't agree with. But the civics education part, nonpartisan, just this is the who, the what, the why, the when, the where, the how. This is it. This is what democracy is. This is America. And this is what democracy is. And I really push that. And Ryan knows that I called him up and I said, Ryan, I think that is a great idea. I said, but there must be a civics education component built into it for us to fully support it.
And is there backlash against that, Deborah, or is there support for that?
Mr. Haygood? Mr. Haygood?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you mean to the civics part or the idea of 16-year-olds voting?
I'm curious about both, but however you want to take it, wherever you want to take it.
Yeah. So, you know, the resistance to it sort of boils down to an argument that goes something like, I have a 16-year-old and he or she, they or them are like irresponsible. I can't imagine like them voting. Like that's like the resistance to it is that 16-year-olds are not ready for the responsibility that is voting, and they'd be prodigal with the opportunity. Now, before addressing that argument, I think it's ironic that came from a person in the city of Newark who's part of the 3% of registered voters who vote, right? So it's hard to imagine a more prodigal use of the vote than not to use it at all, right? So there's that as a counter. But on the merits of like whether 16-year-olds are responsible enough, this is these are young people who learned at home online, who observed online historic abuses of Black and other people of color by police, who helped to lead us into one of the largest social protests in American history, who, if they work, pay taxes, right? There's something we build around the age of 16, probably the biggest birthday you ever have, other than when you turn 21. And 16 is a number that has significance. So I worry less about the idea of being irresponsible or them being not responsible. One, because the way that you're irresponsible with the vote is you don't use it. And there candidly are, as folks in the church would say, a goodly number, Madam President, a goodly number of adults in our beloved city and in cities across New Jersey that sit out school board elections. So I actually think that by centering young people in this effort, arming them with what it means to be engaged civically, they know the issues, and then also saying, look, let's be real, you could also run some of your own candidates. School board elections are decided by, in Newark, a couple thousand votes. With turnout, you could control elections. And here's the thing, adults can't control that. Part of, last thing I'll say is part of what we as adults get nervous about is we can't really control the outcome of what young people will do. It's really, if we get honest, it's less about them being responsible, more about us being worried that they may actually use that vote in a way that lifts their voices up. And I think that's part of what animates my excitement. I mean, think about the school shootings, right? There's a comment just popped up. Adults haven't been willing, right? Adults, for a lot of reasons. Like, I think about Ryan Haygood in college. You remember that college, Sarah, that college, Deborah Smith, Gregory, where you saw the world like almost like in a panoramic way, and you were an idealistic, and you were thinking about ways to change the world. And then as you become older, just by virtue of the lifestyle you live, you've got bills to pay, right? You become, in your orientation, just more conservative, even if you think of yourself as progressive. And I think the purest form of progressivism is when you're not encumbered by the things that often weigh like adults down. And in that sense, I think young people have the greatest opportunity to lift their voices in pure ways, hold elected officials accountable, and also to become elected officials themselves.
And the thing of it is that on the school board, there is a student rep. They have no voting power.
Right.
Right.
Shifting that power dynamic and empower to actually make those decisions could result in lots. And to your point too about the low turnout, if young people got organized, we could see incredible change.
Sarah, can I do this? I know this is not in the script, but you've been so gracious to play the role of the moderator, but you're an expert in this work as well. So I actually just want to kick it back to you, relieve you of the moderator, because I know we're running short on time, the moderator role, and just give you a chance to weigh in on any of the conversation that we've had, given the work you've done with us around this voting piece.
Thank you. I think you all have covered so much and said it better than I ever could, but I think the expansion of the right to vote has been so incredible to see just in the 4 years that I've worked with the ACLU-NJ, and there's more to do, right? Folks inside prison aren't yet eligible to vote. And that's an incredible racial justice issue right on its face, right? New Jersey has the highest rate of racial disparity in prisons in the nation, which is a huge mark of shame that we're working to address, right? But, you know, extending that right to vote for folks inside is incredibly important. I know we've been working with your team, Ryan, and your team, Deborah, too, on jury service, extending jury service opportunities for folks with a criminal legal history, and making sure that folks are able to participate in many facets of democracy. And then there's a really interesting question in the chat too about encouraging and engaging the growing immigrant population to vote. Immigrants make up 1 in 4 New Jerseyans, and our immigrants are incredibly important to New Jersey's diversity, economy, well-being, wealth, and making sure that folks who are legally eligible to vote are able to access polling places without fear, without concern, that language access is extended to folks who need it, are all important issues that we're thinking a lot about in collaboration with you all. But we are especially excited about this fight for the New Jersey Voting Rights Act. You know, Ryan, we talked a little bit about it at the top. And, you know, with the lack of movement, right, from the federal government that we really hope to see to shore up Voting Rights Act, we've seen states across the country start to take leadership. And thanks to the Institute, thanks to all the partners who are working on this issue, New Jersey now has a Voting Rights Act proposed for our state. And so we're calling on everybody who's sitting in a seat of power to take action and to support that in the coming session. We're moving into a session called lame duck. So once we move through this election period, there's a moment where voters will have to continue to lift up their voices in support of all of these issues and hold people accountable. So the ACLU can't wait to continue working with all the voters who are turning out to vote. We're going to absolutely increase voter turnout right this year, y'all, and then keep folks engaged in the fights as we move forward. Ryan, thanks for that opportunity to chat.
You know, Sarah, one of the things that Ryan said about being in college, I can remember thinking that the Voting Rights Act was something that we never had to worry about ever again. And I was haughty with it, like, oh, we're finished with that. We don't have to deal with Voting Rights Act. We can go on to something else. And yet here we are. That you call it a scale back, I call it a backlash. I'm gonna keep calling it a backlash, because that Voting Rights Act was critical, crucial, important, and empowering. And so, you know, it's like, okay, we got that. We can't move forward because we're always needing to go back to recover something that we won, or we thought we won, and we won for the moment. And so this government does things in the moment, and a moment can be 50 years.
Yeah.
It goes right back.
Within a lifetime.
Yeah. So that all the more reason for our young people to get involved, so that they can see the cycle and perhaps break it.
I think to that point, I remember, Sarah, you remember this when we were in law school, there were certain cases that were settled, to your point, Madam President, forever. They included around the Voting Rights Act, they included around affirmative action, they included a woman's right to control what happens with her body. Those were things that we were told at that time, like there's some settled law that the Supreme Court just can't revisit because it's so settled. And we've seen that so-called settled law be upended in ways we couldn't have imagined just in the last couple of years. And I think that's the connection, right? That struggle to protect and then expand rights we've lost or secure rights we've lost comes to young people in this moment. And the question is, do they have the tools and the access to expand, to secure them again? Expand the ones that we have and secure and re-secure the ones that have been lost. And that's an intergenerational fight that is now their fight.
Absolutely. And the fight is becoming more and more local, right? It's coming from the Supreme Court, where, settled laws shifting. And for the first time, right, we're seeing our rights be rolled back there, with Roe v. Wade, as you mentioned, Ryan. But yeah, and then it's up to the states, it's up to our localities, it's up to everybody in our communities to get engaged, to stay engaged, and to protect our rights, and also re-envision what hasn't yet been, right? So like this shift towards younger folks voting and getting engaged, like the work that everybody on this call has been doing to reimagine what true public safety looks like, true community-led public safety looks like, is absolutely critical.
And all 20 seats, 120 seats are up in this November election, and it will directly impact all of us who are living here in New Jersey. So everything that we've talked about about New Jersey, for people who are registered voters, it's something for you to consider. The conversation that we've had to say, okay, I'm going to make sure I get out to vote, because we don't have there's nothing given. We should not take anything for granted. We can't. We absolutely can't, because to your point, affirmative action, Roe versus Wade, and now that things are coming back to the states, the state positions will have even more import than they've had. Well, they've always had it, but now they're being pushed to use it. All of the county commissioner seats are up for election. New Jersey has elections every year, and the only thing that we're asked to do every year, one time, is to come out and vote. We can never get tired of that one time coming out to vote. We can never get tired of making sure that our friends, we have conversations with them. You know how sometimes you say, I don't want to have political conversations with so-and-so. Okay, so you don't want to have a political conversation. Make sure the person is aware of, you need to get out and vote. Whatever your stand is, that's on you, but you still need to get out and vote. And we just have to keep pushing it that way.
So we can't be complacent. We have to stay vigilant. We have to stay active and engaged. We have to stay passionate, and we have to stay together and working together. Any final thoughts? I'm getting some direction that we're starting to wrap up. It's been such a pleasure. I could talk to y'all all night about all the incredible work and all the important things that are going on, but close us out, please, Deborah, with some final thoughts, and then Ryan, I'll ask you to close out as well.
So I want to read something else in AACP. This is something that we are encouraged to use. The NAACP must be so strong in numbers and so effective in method that no mayor of any city, no governor of any state, no congressman of any party, no president of the United States, and no foreign ambassador will dare to commit any indignity against people of color without realizing the NAACP will challenge them on the platform, in the press, in the courts, in the streets, and at the ballot box.
Thank you for that ongoing and everlasting power. Really appreciate that. Thank you. Brian, take us.
Sure, Sarah. Thanks for leading us through the discussion. I would just reiterate the opportunity that we have, so again, this is an election year. Every seat is up in the legislature. I encourage folks following my colleague Henel Patel's leading to make sure that you know which district you're in following our 2020 redistricting, and know who your elected official is. Contact your elected official and lift up two pieces of legislation. Do you support the existing bills around creating same-day voter registration, and that would create a New Jersey Voting Rights Act, to Sarah's point. And then here's the thing, I think the Selma example is so powerful because it shows us that when strides have been made for democracy, they've always started from the ground up in our local communities, right? Never from Washington, D.C. down. It's always started in our communities from the ground up, and then D.C. takes notice, which is why I've talked about this a lot, but I think this is why the lowering the voting age to 16 opportunity gives us a real chance to engage locally. So if you are part of an organization, an NAACP branch in your city, another civic organization, I encourage you to look at this issue as an issue that you can champion by organizing a group of your folks. You can reach out to us. We can share with you the ordinance that we drafted that you could get introduced in your city council. And then you engage the students in your high schools and encourage them to join you and to lift their voices to testify and support. I think that's the way this gets done in New Jersey. And here's the thing, the opportunity is, my colleague McCalry Vargas said that there are about 3 cities nationally that have done it. So we're ahead of the curve on this issue. This could be a chance for New Jersey to lead on an issue around engaging the next generation of young voters. And we would love to partner with you to do that. So you can reach out to us to talk about how to do that. Thank you so much.
Fabulous. Thank you. Thank you both. Always a pleasure. And I'm going to pass it back to Donna to take us away.
Thank you so much. This was so incredible, so informative. I have 6 pages of notes. So thank you again, all of you, for your expertise and your passion and direction. And so I just wanted to remind everyone, next month, our Standing in Solidarity will have 2 panel discussions. We're going to celebrate the 50th anniversary of hip hop. That'll be with Chuck D, MC Debbie DM, and Grandmaster DXT. That's Monday, October 16th. And then on October 30th, in honor of Hispanic Heritage Month, we're going to have a discussion on the impact of African culture on Latino music and dance. And then we have a number of other events coming up this month. Black Liberation, which will be at the Newark Public Library. That's actually tomorrow at 6 o'clock. That'll be a discussion on seeking freedom in the 18th and 19th century in Newark. And then we have our Arts Education Department Social Justice Learning Series. October 4th, they're going to be talking about a style nobody can deal with: hip hop, Black aesthetics, and the arts. So we're having fun here at NJPAC. Invite everyone to join us as we continue to learn and grow and take action. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great evening. Thank you.
Right.